This year, LG have given us 3 brand new but very different UltraGear monitors. A 27-inch 5K, 39-inch 5K 2K, and a ginormous 52-inch 5K 2K. All part of their Evo range for their ultra high definition beyond the 4K that we typically see for high definition monitors. On paper, they are very similar. Their connectivity, resolution, and on-screen menus all practically identical. But behind those similar paper specs, there's still very, very different panels, different pixel density, wildly different use cases, and also wildly different prices. So if you are trying to work out which one is actually right for you, this is that video. Look what you done. Now, I've spent the last few weeks or so reviewing all 3 of the LG 2026 UltraGear Evo lineup, plus also last year's 45-inch UltraGear. And since we made all of those videos, LG asked if they could sponsor a video like this to help people understand the differences and help decide which of the 3 or the 4 might actually be the most suitable for you. Now, if you want just the quick answer, well, I'll give you that and then I'll explain the why for the rest of the video. So if you're a Mac user after a studio display alternative, or you just want the sharpest, most productivity-friendly screen in a sensible size, then go for the 27-inch GM9 Mini LED. Now, if you want the best all-rounder, in my opinion, the best picture, balancing both work and play, and honestly, again, the one I would point most people towards, then go for the 39-inch GX9 OLED. And if you want the biggest, fastest, most immersive screen for gaming, and especially for sim racing, get the 52-inch G9. But there are a couple of gotchas that could change which one you pick. Plus, what about last year's 45-inch LG UltraGear, and how does that fit into the whole lineup? Now, quick one before we dig in. We've been lucky enough to review, a lot of monitors this year, and that is genuinely down to those of you who have subscribed off the back of those reviews. So a huge thank you for that. And usually like 95% of people watching aren't subscribed. So if you do find this guide useful, do hit that subscribe, and it does really, really help this channel more than you could think. So let's first start with what these 3 share, so I don't have to bore you with the same information over and over again. So 2 run at 5K 2K, that's 5120 by 2160, and one of them at 5K, which is 5120 by 2880. All 3 have that same clean, minimal UltraGear design that just works just as well in an office as it does in a little gaming den, with the clean LED lighting on the back that you can just set to a color, cycle through, or just switch off if that's not your thing. Now, they all use the same on-screen menu, the little nipple thing controls on the back of the screen, which LG have just really nailed. They've got quick access to everything you need, including gaming features like a crosshair, an FPS counter if you want them, custom shortcuts as well, and just none of the bloats that you get on some other brands' monitors. They've all got USB-C ports with 90 watts charging, which Mac users especially will love, and they've all got matte anti-glare coating, which is very much the direction this whole industry is heading in. And here's a big one for anyone running multiple machines. None of these 3 have a USB KVM. For some reason, I've seen multiple comments on our videos and in places such as Reddit saying that we're wrong. And I think it's because people maybe don't understand what KVM actually means. KVM stands for keyboard, video, and mouse, which are supposed to follow you around as you switch inputs. So typically, you connect your keyboard and mouse into the monitor, and then you switch from, say, your PC on HDMI 1 to your Mac on HDMI 2. That keyboard and mouse, as well as the display, will all connect to that second machine. Now, in some cases, like with the 52-inch LG, there is a single USB-C upstream port which you can connect to one single computer to share other USB devices, which include, of course, a keyboard and a mouse. But since it only has a single upstream port, it can't then move those devices between other computers when you switch the inputs. With that said, LG does have a network KVM feature that uses software installed on each device that does give you this KVM feature, but it's not a feature that's tied to a specific monitor. Therefore, when I say that a monitor doesn't have KVM built in, well, it's not built in to the display. So I just hope that clears that one up. And also AI features. So both the 27 and 39-inch UltraGear Evo monitors have new AI upscaling features and AI sound features this year, but the 52-inch display does not, which for a very specific use case is great. If you're gaming on a less powerful, maybe handheld devices like a Nintendo Switch, then this feature can sharpen up games to give them more clarity. But for most PC users, you'll find you'll get better results with something like NVIDIA's own upscaling features. Oh, and warranty, all three get 2 years here in the UK. The 27-inch is 1 year in the US, I believe. The thing that really separates these three screens more than anything else, though, is the panel technology. So the 27-inch GM9 is a Hyper Mini LED. It can get very bright with no burn-in risk and has the highest pixel density of the three. The 39-inch GX9 is a 4th gen Tandem OLED, the best picture quality here by a mile, with perfect blacks, insane contrast, and my personal favourite panel type. And also the 52-inch G9 is a VA panel, not OLEDs, not mini LED. It is the biggest and fastest, but it's also the weakest of the three as far as picture quality goes. So just keep that in the back of your minds as we go through each one here. So let's start small, the 27-inch GM9. Now, this is the one that had the most buzz online when there was a whole Reddit thread about it, both as an excellent gaming monitor, but also a potential alternative to the Apple Studio display. It is a 27-inch 5K Hyper Mini LED running at 218 pixels per inch, which is the exact same pixel density as Apple's 27-inch Studio display, and just why so many people are looking at this as a cheaper, more flexible Studio display alternative that isn't locked in the Apple ecosystem. It also topped RTINGS Best Mini LED monitor for 2026. And in use, text is very sharp and fringing is practically non-existent. Now, in terms of the pros, you have brightness. So LG are calling this a Hyper Mini LED. It hits 1250 nits peak brightness, and with barely any drop off from the center to the edges, which is actually quite rare in our findings. Mac performance is also pretty flawless. Every MacBook I tested, the M4 Air, M4 Pro, and M3 Max pulled 5120 by 2880 at 144 Hz with VRR. There is no display screen compression, so that single DisplayPort 2.1 gets the full UHBR 20 spec, so you get full resolution, full refresh rate with no display stream compression. There's also no burn-in worry because it's mini LED, not OLED, and it is a cracking gaming monitor. 165 Hz at 5K, or tap the dual mode button to drop to 1440p at a much higher 330 Hz. But in terms of the cons, the contrast is only 1000 to 1, which is fine, but it's nowhere near what you get with an OLED monitor. There is no picture-in-picture or picture-by-picture on this one. And obviously, I guess it's only 27 inches. So if you're here for a big immersive screen, then this isn't the one. But the biggest one for me is something that is more of a limitation with the display technology than this specific display. With mini LED displays, there can be noticeable blooming and haloing, especially depending on the settings you are using. And again, this isn't necessarily unique to this display. My 57-inch Samsung Odyssey mini LED has very similar issues as well. Because this display is backlit, even with thousands of dimming zones, one tiny bright white object on the display means a whole zone's LEDs have to turn on, which then gives you this halo effect around anything bright. Now, the fix for this is, well, you can just turn local dimming off completely, in which case just black levels and contrast just disappears and everything kind of becomes grey. Now, we did notice that the problem is worse when it sets to the medium level, where, as you can clearly see here on a dark background, small white objects have a very obvious halo effect around them. And even when set to high or low, it does introduce flickering into the image, as it's obviously trying to do its best here to do something. So if you are planning on playing bright games, then I don't think this is a problem. But if you are a dark mode kind of person and playing dimly lit games, this could be a really obvious problem. But again, I don't think this is a specific problem with this 27-inch panel. It's just something that's a characteristic of mini LED monitors. But with that said, the Apple Studio Display XDR also has the same number of dimming zones. It's 2,304, I believe, and seems to do a much better job than the GM9, although it's almost 3 times the cost of the GM9. Also worth noting that our sample model also had some glitching issues which were fixed with a firmware update, and I've seen at least one similar story on Reddit. So if you are having issues, it's worth starting with the firmware updates. It's nice to know that LG are actively working on firmware updates for these screens. Now, in terms of who this is for, Mac users wanting a Studio Display alternative that can also hook into other devices like a console or a PC, anyone on a smaller desk who wants to maximize their sharpness, and gamers who are after a high-resolution 27-inch display that can flip to faster refresh rates. We also went through places like Reddit and RTINGS and pulled some popular questions viewers were asking. The first one being, do I have to update the firmware? And the answer is definitely yes. There was a verified buyer that described the out-of-box sharpness and uniformity issues, which the firmware then fixed. So definitely get get that installed. Another question was, is the panel uniform? Now, this is the most common complaints apparently with darker edges, noticeable edge fall off. We didn't experience this with our model. Maybe it's just an issue with certain displays that have been shipped out, but certainly not something we've seen so far. And then the other big one has been what's going on with local dimming. Now, as I've just explained, there is some local dimming issues with this type of panel. We did also know that RTINGS discovered that it can't sustain peak brightness beyond about 3 minutes or so, and we've actually been able to replicate those same issues. It definitely does dim after a few minutes worth of use. So there is something worth knowing about. Again, hopefully that's something that will get fixed with the firmware updates at some point in the future. But again, don't buy a product based on future promises. Buy it on the basis of its current performance. Next question was, is this a real Apple Studio Display XDR alternative? And I would think here that yes, it is, but for a different audience. So obviously the price is different. So if you want a more affordable option, but also one you can plug in PC, gaming consoles, and game at higher refresh rates, then that does offer an alternative over the Studio Display, the Studio Display XDR. And then the last one here was, does the AI upscaling actually do anything? I keep seeing people ask this question. And again, we'll play some footage here, but if you are gaming off things like a lower resolution Nintendo Switch or something, then yes, there is some slight differences. But again, something like the NVIDIA's own upscaling technology does seem to give better results overall. Now let's move on to the one I would point most of you towards, and actually my favorite from all of this year's releases, the 39-inch GX9. So this was one of the most anticipated launches of the year, and whilst it's not the successor to last year's 45-inch model that's still on display and you can still buy this, it is a question that many people are asking as whether this is like an upgrade or maybe a side grade instead. So this is a 21:9 curved 5K 2K 4th gen Tandem OLED, and it is pretty awesome. This display actually became a thing due to feedback from the community. It was like the widely requested display format and everything. There's so many people were saying that the 45-inch was a bit too big or a bit too curved. So the 39-inch hits that sweet spot that people are actually asking for. You get the same 5K 2K resolution, but because it is a smaller panel, you're now getting a 143 ppi instead of 125 on that 45-inch model. So it's a noticeably sharper image for text and for productivity, while still being wide enough to be a brilliant like hybrid work and play screen. Now, in terms of the pros for this screen, you have the picture, of course, which is the 4th gen Tandem OLED, which means incredible blacks, 1.85 million to 1 contrast ratio, up to 99.5% DCI-P3 color, and 0 blooming as well. Ghosting is incredible on this screen with that 0.03 millisecond response time as well. Compared side by side with the Dell 52-inch IPS panel and the Samsung 57-inch Mini LED, this LG panel is just so much sharper. It's night and day difference. Brightness is also genuinely leading its class for OLED here for up to 1500 nits peak, and we measure close to 1350 at a 10% window. So very, very bright OLED screen here. They also finally fixed DSC. That DisplayPort 2.1 now runs at full UHBR20, so you get 165 Hz native resolution with no display stream compression, which was one of the biggest concerns again with the 45-inch. And of course, it's an OLED, so it only weighs about 15 pounds, dead easy to throw on a monitor arm, even single personed. Now, in terms of the cons, I did say in my last review that the speakers are bad on it, but LG have since pushed a firmware update that makes them sound better. I would still recommend a separate headset or speakers, but they are better. Again, really nice to see that LG are regularly pushing firmware updates to fix issues here. Also, the AI upscaling features might be unnecessary for some PC users, again, especially if you're already rocking a high-end graphics card, but for lower-end rigs or maybe Nintendo Switch gamers, potentially quite useful. I will also say the curve plus a badly placed light here can also throw reflections across the screen. And again, this isn't unique to LG or this particular screen, it's just physics with curved screens, but worth mentioning in case you have some bright light sources around you. However, burn-in though is always like the main OLED caveats. So LG covers it under the 2-year warranty, and there are protection features built in, but it is a consideration for the screen this pricey. Also, don't forget this is a 4th gen Tandem OLED that does have much lower risk of burn-in. Now, in terms of who this screen is for, basically everyone who wants, one screen that does it all. Brilliant for productivity, brilliant for gaming, best picture of the three. And if you thought the 45-inch was, too much, too curved, too big, then this is the one. And honestly, between that last year's 45-inch and this 39-inch screen, I would take the 39-inch now over last last year's 49-inch. Again, some popular questions online. Now, the single most asked question by a mile is 39-inch versus 45. Are you like downgrading? Are you side grading? And the general consensus online is no. Lots of people saying the 39-inch is the sweet spots. There's a gentler 1500R curve being far more usable than the 45-inch 800R, which a lot of people think is too much. There's a higher PPI for text, and a lot of people also saying the 45-inch is just simply too big for many desks. So 39-inch is like, again, it's that sweet spot people are asking for. The next question that's often coming up is, can my GPU even drive a 5K 2K display? It's a huge theme, and this is even coming from 5090 owners. And from my own personal experience, I'm going to put on some screen here some results we've seen with our 5090 here, both Intel and AMD builds, just to give you a bit of an idea in the type of FPS you can expect. And these are all using DLSS on, but also all the games maxed out in their ultra or highest quality settings with ray tracing enabled. There's also a question saying, is this a real upgrade from a 34-inch? And lots of people are saying, yes, this is noticeably more immersive. There are lots of people saying, is 165 hertz enough? And I think at 5K 2K, at 165 hertz, you're still really pushing it. You still need a very high-end PC to do that. And maybe if you are trying to future-proof, then maybe wait to see other monitors that might be announced at some point. But again, it's, do you wait for something that might never come, or do you buy something that's gonna, tick your boxes right now? And then of course there's the whole like, why matte and not glossy? And the matte coating gets a lot of complaints from a lot of people, with people hoping that other brands will find the glossy versions. I would say that to me, the matte coating doesn't look bad. It's not like a really off-putting, it doesn't like mess with the colors. It still works really, really well. And actually in environments where you have lots of lights around you, it works very, very well. But of course, with the curved display, it can kind of bend and expand that light if you have a badly placed light in a badly placed position. And now let's talk about the absolute unit, the 52-inch G9. So now this is currently the largest monitor LG make, and it is at least at launch, the world's first 52-inch 240Hz 5K 2K gaming monitor, where the other two top out at 165Hz native. This one does the full 5K 2K at 240Hz, and that's just the whole point of this screen. So sit at a normal desk distance with that like 1000R curve wrapping around you, and for immersive gaming, and again I said especially sim racing, it is such good fun. After a few seconds, you kind of forget about everything else and just get lost in whatever game you're playing. So in terms of the pros, you have again size and speed, 52 inches, 5K 2K, 240Hz. So if that's your dream setup, particularly again for a sim rig or flight sim or something like that, this is awesome for that. And now it is a VA panel, so there's no burn-in risk, and blooming is well controlled here, noticeably better than the 57-inch Samsung G9 Mini LED. We actually decided to see how many monitors we could hook up at once, and I noticed the 52-inch display seemed to be the most like contrasty and colorful, but with darker images, you definitely notice the backlights. And it's also great for consoles. Your PS5 gets full 120Hz, HDR, VRR, all of the good stuff. Now, in terms of the cons for this monitor, it is the weakest for productivity. 108 PPI versus 143 on the 39-inch. So text just isn't very sharp. It'll do productivity, but only as a secondary reason by this screen. Now, there's also the panel types. This is VA, so there's no true black certification. Colors can look a little bit washed out next to the OLEDs, and contrast isn't in the same league. It tops out at a 600 nits HDR, 400 SDR, and there's also 90 to 95% DCI-P3. So you're not buying this for color accuracy. You are buying it for pure like 52-inch, 240Hz, 5K 2K gaming. You've also got DSE is back here. So that DisplayPort 2.1 only runs UHBR 13.5, not the full like 80 gig UHBR 20 spec. So it needs display stream compression to hit that 240Hz at the native resolution. There's also no official NVIDIA G-Sync support here. There's FreeSync support only. Plus, and I guess, obviously, it's very, very heavy. It's VA, it's not OLED, and it's very power hungry, around 100 watts in normal use, up to 120 watts when you're actually pushing the screen. And so, honestly, I would really struggle to recommend this screen over last year's 45-inch OLED, unless, again, you specifically want 52-inch, 240Hz, 5K 2K, and maybe that zero burn-in risk. So for most people, the 45-inch is the better overall buy here. Brighter, more vibrant, better contrast, sharper for work, it's lighter, and it's around the same price. But as a pure, no like excuses gaming display for sim racers, gonna love this thing. It is a great monitor still for that specific use case. Now, in terms of general online questions, the main dominant question is 52-inch too big? And how far away do you sit? So most people generally sit, a couple of feet away or so, scaling around 125 to 150% within windows, with that 1000 R curve feeling kind of necessary, not excessive at that size. And again, that's kind of where you'll be sat for lots of sim racing kind of things, maybe even further away for sim races if you've got, you know, the whole kind of gaming sim racing setup in front of you. Another one was, can I drive 5K, 2K at 240 Hertz? This is very, very common online. And we're going to throw up on screen some specs here, some FPS figures we got from both a 5090 card, but on an AMD and an Intel build. Unfortunately, we don't have a 9070 XT to test with here anymore, but in terms of the 5090s figures, you can at least take those and figure out where you sit from there. And then we have the whole like VA versus OLED and which do you pick? So I would say here that VA is going to win for people who, you know, run your displays like 24/7 and obviously have a concern over OLEDs like image retention and burn-in, those kind of things. But then the trade-off you get here is like low brightness, weak HDR performance, and again, that like aggressive curve, maybe distorting straight lines if you're like a designer or trying to do any design work. One more was, does it actually replace a multi-monitor setup? And I would definitely say yes here. Like the difference here is that with one big screen, you have the space to position screens as you wish, rather than what most people do, at least on Windows, is you have a multi-monitor display, you'll like maximize, say you've got 3 displays, you'll maximize 3 windows, 1 on each, and that's the most you get. Whereas with using tools such as like fancy zones, you can actually position the zones exactly on screen as you wish or size them appropriately. And then the last one that cropped up a lot was the value at like $1,700 to $2,000 each for this. It's pretty hard to justify, especially when something like the 45-inch OLED has been out for a year already. Might be some great discounts to be found already on that one. Again, the 45-inch model is still a phenomenal monitor. And as I've already said, for a lot of people, it is still the better buy over that new 52-inch screen. Its only real weakness versus the newer 39-inch display is the older DSC limitation, slightly lower PPI, plus of course that deeper curve, which some people find it's just too much for them. So that is the 2026 lineup of LG Evo monitors. Like I said before, 3 very, very different screens that fit 3 very different purposes. Of course, if you want to go watch the full review of the 39-inch UltraGear OLED, then you can click here or check out this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.